Good evening, dear Father Andrew Phillips. I'm very happy for having you as a guest here for my YouTube channel. I'm very delighted for the fact that I have this opportunity of presenting in this public context the history of English Orthodoxy, a subject which is considered probably very exotic by some other Orthodox believers from Eastern Europe, because actually talking about English Orthodox Church, in spite of the fact there is no English Orthodox Church, because all Orthodox believers from the United Kingdom are connected to different jurisdictions, but there is still a certain Orthodox tradition connected to the United Kingdom, connected to the history of England, and this is why I consider it a very important topic on which we should talk about. And I'm really happy for having had the opportunity of making another interview with you a long time ago in 2014 about the Orthodox Church in England, an interview that I have published in one of my books dedicated to a huge volume with different conversations with Westerners converted to Orthodox Church. And this is why I'm very grateful to you for giving me this opportunity. And I will be very glad to find out some more information about ancient Orthodox Church, about the old Church of England, a subject which is very important for you. And I know you are you are getting involved in such kind of researches. But before we talk about the history of Orthodox spirituality in England, I would be very grateful if you could present your spiritual personality, your road to Orthodox Church. What was actually the reason why you have chosen the conversion to Orthodox Church?
Well, I was born in England, and I was not brought up with any religion. And when I was 12 years old, I began to get interested in religion. What is religion? What is it for? And I discovered the New Testament, and I read the New Testament, and I decided that, well, yes, everything makes sense. I'm a Christian. But if you're a Christian, then it says that you must find a church. It says the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. So where is the church? So I visited the Protestant Church of England church. It did nothing for me. And then I visited a Catholic church. It did nothing for me. And I looked and said, well, I don't understand. And I began reading, and I discovered that there's something also called the Orthodox Church. At that time, Orthodoxy was very little known. There were very few Orthodox churches outside London, and I didn't live in London. But when I was 16 years old, I finally managed to visit an Orthodox church. And when I entered the church, I knew I was home. This was my place. This was where I had always been without knowing it. So despite the fact that it was in a foreign language, despite the fact that it was completely different, I felt at home. And I made my home there, and now I've been a priest. Well, I've been serving in the clergy for nearly 38 years, and I studied at seminary in Paris, in France, and before this at the beginning, and I'm just at home in the Orthodox Church. It's my place. I couldn't be anywhere else.
Sure, I understand very well the depth of your testimony, and I'm sure that your testimony, your spiritual road could represent a real model, a life model for those who are searching for the truth. And maybe your testimony could be considered a way by which we would have the opportunity of knowing the Orthodox Church better, because you see, we are baptized in Orthodox Church. In Romania, in Greece, in Bulgaria, in Russia, in different other Orthodox countries. But maybe we are becoming a little bit superficial, because we are not having such a deep idea on what really means being an Orthodox believer. But you, as a Westerner converted to Orthodox Church, you are not so superficial because you have discovered by your own the Orthodox tradition, the Orthodox Church, and Orthodox Church meant everything to you. This is why you became an Orthodox believer, and not just a believer who goes to a certain parish. You are a priest right now, and one of the most well-known Orthodox theologians all over the world. You are very well known for your studies, for your books, for your researches. And considering that, tell me please something about the history of Orthodox England. What actually should we know about the history of Orthodox spirituality in England, but not only in England, in Ireland as well?
Well, we have a situation where Protestantism began in the 16th century, 500 years ago, in other words. And as you know, that there are lots of different Protestant sects that grew up 300 years ago, 200 years ago, and they're still growing. But they have no historical background. If we go back in England, in Ireland, in all Western countries before the 16th century, before the Protestant Reformation, what do we find? We find Roman Catholicism. And if you look back in history, you find that nobody spoke about Roman Catholicism. Nobody spoke about nearly everything that makes Roman Catholics different began in the 11th or 12th century. So we come to a mystery. And the mystery is that what was there here, not just in England or Ireland, but in the whole of Western Europe until the 11th century? What was here in the first millennium, the first 1,000 years of history, of Christian history? And if you make a little study, if you talk to people who know about this, if you go to very ancient churches, you find something very, very different, and something which in fact is in harmony with today's Orthodox Church. So if you study, for example, the lives of the saints who lived here in the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th centuries, you find an identity between them and contemporary Orthodox saints. In other words, although the ritual, the rite was different, there is an identity of purpose, identity of spirit. And it's this spiritual identity which actually I, as an Englishman, discovered through the contemporary Orthodox Church. For example, I can remember when I was about 17, I read the life of a Russian saint called St. Seraphim of Sarov. And after that, I read the life of an English saint from the 7th century called St. Cuthbert of Lindisfarne. What is the difference? There is no difference. This is the same spirit. And it doesn't matter, you can take a Russian saint, you can take a Greek saint, you can take a Romanian saint, Bulgarian, Serbian. It's the same spirit as these ancient saints, these saints from the first 1,000 years. And it doesn't matter whether you go to the beginnings of Christianity in Italy, or in Gaul, France, in Spain, in Portugal, anywhere, the first saints in Western Europe, whether they were from the 1st century, the 6th century, or the 10th century, they have the same spirit as the Orthodox saints who we know. So for me, the Orthodox Church is a continuation of the ancient church that was here and died out. It was overtaken by Roman Catholicism and then Protestantism. So for me, it's spiritual identity. It's identity of spirit. And this is the important thing. And you can read the lives of the ancient Western saints and the lives of contemporary or ancient Orthodox saints. It's the same spirit.
Some years ago, I have studied a book written by Vladimir Moss. I don't know, maybe you know him very well. Yes, I have been doing more than 3 interviews with him, and also with his wife, Olga Moss, a Japanese camp survivor. It was an amazing opportunity, a spiritual opportunity for me, talking to his wife. And Vladimir Moss published a book entitled The Fall of Orthodox England. And
Yes, I know
at
it.
some point,
I have a
yes,
copy.
you know very well.
Yes, yes.
Then of course, you know it very well. And I would have a very simple question. The author talks about some kings who were Orthodox, as for example, Ethelred or Edward the Confessor, Edward the Martyr. Tell me something about the importance of this king, Edward the Confessor, for Orthodox England. Is he that important for the history of Orthodox Church in England?
I would prefer to talk about saints like St. Edmund of East Anglia, who was the first patron saint of England, or St. Edward the Martyr. There are a whole lot of early kings. St. Oswald is another famous one in the 7th century, 8th, 9th, 10th centuries, who represent the same spirit as you can find, for example, among the Serbian rulers, the Serbian kings, who lived in the 12th, 13th, 14th century. And these were people who, although they were kings, although they carried swords, they carried weapons, they defended their country, they defended their people, and they defended the faith. And this is totally different from the later medieval, the kings of the Middle Ages, the Crusaders, for example, who were very brutal and very offensive. They did not defend, they offended, they attacked, they were aggressive, in other words. And we can find really the same spirit in some of the emperors of Constantinople, in certain of the Russian rulers as well. Or you can find, for example, in Romania, St. Stefan and his family. Here we have a whole family who defended the faith. And this is something which you just don't find in the later period, in the second millennium, the second 1,000 years.
Yes, I understand very well, and it's very important, your explanation, because some students of mine, for example, although I'm a philosophy teacher and I'm teaching at a faculty focused on philosophical studies, but in spite of this fact, there are numerous students interested in the history of Orthodox Church in Western countries, because of the fact that I have published a book entitled The Rediscovery of Orthodox Heritage of the West. And they are asking me, but what kind of Orthodox history does England have, or Ireland, or France, or Belgium, or Netherlands, and so on? And of course, I try to explain them in light of my different correspondences with different Westerners converted to Orthodox Church. Yes, I knew about the importance of Saint Patrick, for example, for Ireland, about the importance of Edward the Confessor, because Vladimir Moss is very, I don't know how should I say, but as I can understand, he is very maybe related somehow to Saint Edward the Confessor, and he always, at least this is how he talked to me. He told me, yes, Edward the Confessor is the heart of Orthodox Church in England. This is why I wanted to put you this question, so that I can see what kind of opinion do you have. Now I understand much better how should I understand the history of Orthodox England. Anyway, tell me please, because this, I repeat, talking about an English Orthodox Church could seem a little bit not weird, but let's say exotic for us here in Eastern Europe. Can you present, please, the most important representatives, if I can call them like that, of English Orthodox Church, and how can we talk about a real and about an independent Orthodox Church in England, of course, related to English traditions?
Okay, well, I don't talk about it. It's something that doesn't exist, and I'm a realist. As you said quite rightly, most of the native people in this country, in other words, who have not emigrated from Eastern Europe, for example, most of the native people in this country who are Orthodox are English. There are very few in Scotland, very few in Wales, very few in Ireland. Most are English. And we are all members of other local churches. The Romanian church, which is so big here, the Greek church under the Patriarchate of Constantinople, the two Russian groups, the Serbian church, and also the Antiochian Church, which is from Syria, from Damascus and Beirut. So basically, these are the five jurisdictions where English people find themselves. And I think it's very good that we enter into these churches, we commune with Romanians, with Russians, with Greeks, and so on, because that is how the subtleties of the faith are things which we learn from these people. You cannot learn about Orthodoxy from books. It's negative. I have people who phone me up at least once a month, say, I've read about Orthodox Church on the internet. I say, well, come and see us. They never come. But the key to understanding our Orthodox faith is in Orthodox services. And until you come to the services regularly, you meet other Orthodox people, you are not Orthodox. You're simply someone who has an exotic interest, because Orthodoxy is a way of life. It's how we live our faith. And that's the important thing. I have a very large parish, which has 25 nationalities in it, the biggest nationality of which are Romanians. And most of the people are really very young. They're either children or else their parents who are 25, 30, 35, 40 years old. We actually have very few people over the age of 40, which is completely different from the profile of people who go to church in Romania or Russia or Greece. And one of our problems is that we have very, very few old people, hardly anyone. So we are a community of families. And I always say to English people who telephone me, come to church, meet people, associate with them, because these are people who have no illusions about Orthodoxy. You can get illusions from reading books, from reading the internet. For example, there are very idealistic young people, English Orthodox people, who say, well, isn't it wonderful? The Orthodox Church is wonderful, and Orthodox people are all holy. They're like saints. I say, well, you know, have you ever been to a prison in Greece? Have you been to a prison in Romania? Or I say this because I'm a prison chaplain. I visit Orthodox in 4 different prisons in this country. And I say it's full of Orthodox people who are baptized, who steal things, who murder other people. They're all Orthodox. And of course, immediately they're quiet. If you want, I lived in Greece for a year, for example, and I was a young man when I was 22 years old. And I saw during the fasts, the post, all the butcher's shops were open. People were buying meat. Now, this is reality. We have to understand that Orthodoxy, it's up to you. You can live very strictly, like they do in the monasteries. You can keep all the fast, the post, or you can live very loosely. And let's be honest, most Orthodox do not go to church. And if they do go to church, it's once a year at Pascha, at Easter. This is the reality. But we are continually having people who come to us, and because they are in England, they're not in Romania or Russia, they suddenly start taking their faith seriously. They suddenly realize what it is. If I can make a parallel, I used to know someone who lived in London, just next to the famous Tower Bridge over the River Thames. He lived maybe 5 minutes away from Tower Bridge. And I said, well, have you been to Tower Bridge? He said, I've never been there. I've lived here for 20 years. I've never seen it. And it's the same thing. I knew someone in France who lived just near the Eiffel Tower. They could see the Eiffel Tower from their bedroom window. And I said, well, have you been to the top? No, that's only for tourists. And I think it's the same thing when you are Romanian or Russian or Greek and you are born into the church, as it were, you are baptized as a baby, you have no idea what you have. You do not appreciate what you have. And it's always the same thing. When you have something, you only appreciate it when you begin to lose it. And this is what happens to so many people who come here from Eastern Europe. They suddenly begin to realize, I'm Orthodox, it's my identity. Now, if I may continue this, we have so many children in our parish. We have 50 to 100 children every Sunday in our church, the majority of whom have Romanian parents. But the Romanian children were born in England, and they're mixing with children who are Greek, Russian, Bulgarian, and they're talking to each other. And I hear them, and they're talking in English. They're growing up as English children. And I always tell them, yes, at home, your parents speak to you in Romanian or Greek or whatever. That's very good. You try and keep your heritage, your cultural heritage. But what is your identity? And their identity, basically, they say, well, I'm English. I was born in England. I go to an English school. All my friends are English. And I said, well, what is your identity? And I tell them, your identity is Orthodox. You are in England, yes, like all the others, but you are Orthodox. You're Orthodox Christians. And I have to reinforce this. We all do this all the time. You are Orthodox. That is your identity. And it doesn't matter what nationality you are. It doesn't matter what passport you have. You all have one spiritual passport. And your spiritual passport is your Orthodox Christian passport. And this is very important as a witness to non-Orthodox people. In England, when you go to the hospital, they will ask your name, address, phone number, and they ask your religion. It's always done here. And I have people asking me, what do I answer? I say, you say Orthodox Christian. You can, if you want, say Romanian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, but Orthodox Christian. You must have the word Christian, because the word Orthodox in English, for most English people, it means you're Jewish. You're not Jewish. You don't go to a synagogue. Orthodox Christian. The word Orthodox is an adjective. It describes we are Christians. What sort of Christians are we? We are Orthodox Christians. This is our identity. And this is becoming much better known now. Some people will say they're Eastern Orthodox, which is fine. But also, again, as soon as you say Orthodox without the word Christian, people will say, oh, you must be Jewish. So you have to use this word carefully.
Yes, I really love this idea. I really like hearing this idea. It doesn't matter your national identity because your Orthodox identity is the most important one. Because actually, and I'm very sad when I hear that Orthodox believers are very related to their own nations. I'm a Greek, I'm a Russian, I'm a Romanian, and as far as I know, Philotism was declared by Saint Fathers of the Church as an heresy. Maybe the biggest heresy in the world, but in spite of this fact, this nationalistic identity remains, and I'm very worried about that, because I don't think we should about our own national identities. Yes, I am a Romanian, and I will be always a Romanian until the end of my life. You are an English, yes, very well, but this diversity maybe is the logic of God's creation. In Orthodox Church, we have no national boundaries, no national identities. We are the same because the Church of God is his own body, and we should understand that, in my opinion. And I'm a very universal believer, because for me as well, and this is why I'm very dedicated to research on the Orthodox spirituality, not only in Western society, but in Africa as well, or in Asia. Some days ago, I have done an interview with an Orthodox priest from Ghana. And I've been talking to him about the presence of Orthodox Church in different African countries. No one in Romania heard about that. And an Orthodox priest called me and he has asked me, but it is true, is there an Orthodox community in Ghana, in Africa, in different African countries? Yes, there is, because the Orthodox Church represents Christ's message, and we should understand that. But nevertheless, I have a curiosity which regards, of course, your national identity. Yes, you told me, and I totally agree with you. But being an Englishman and being at the same time an Orthodox believer, which is the most important aspect for you, how do you feel you as an Englishman in the Orthodox Church? Is there any probably a special feeling that you have from this point of view?
I don't think about it. I just live my life. I'm an Orthodox priest and I mix with different people. It's just not something that ever occurs to me. I'm a bit like you. I'm saddened to see that there are some churches which have a national flag in them. We have no flags in our church, and we never will have. For example, during the Divine Liturgy, at the great entrance when we commemorate our Patriarch, our Metropolitan, and the civil authorities, I always say the following. I say, remember all the lands of the earth where Orthodox Christians live. It doesn't matter what land it is. Yes, of course, we have our national identity. We have a passport, a physical passport, and we have a first language, which might be Romanian or Greek or whatever. But this is not the most important thing. Just think, the Apostle Luke, did he go around saying, I'm Greek, I'm Jewish? St. John Chrysostom, did he go around saying, I'm an Arab? Saint Paraskeva, did she go around saying, giving her nationality? It's not even sure what nationality she was, by the way. St. Seraphim of Sarov, if I mention him again, did he go around saying, I'm Russian, I'm Russian? It never occurred to him. It's totally irrelevant. Many years ago, I mean, I've been in the Orthodox Church for nearly 50 years now, and one of the first people I met was Father Raphael Noica, who lived here, and I knew his mother, and I met his father. Father Raphael is an extraordinary man. He switches from one language to another, just like that, from German to Greek to Russian, Romanian to English to French. For me, he and many others are examples of living Orthodoxy. Yes, Father Raphael, he left England as soon as he could. He returned to Romania, where he was born. And it's normal that you serve your people. For example, I've often wondered why I wasn't born maybe in Russia or Greece or Romania. And I wasn't. It wasn't God's will. God put me here. So here I must serve. Here I must serve my people. Yes, it's true that I've lived abroad for many years. I lived in France, in Portugal, in Greece. I lived in Russia. But that was not where God called me to serve the church and serve the people. It was here. And if that is God's will, then I must obey that will. And I feel the same thing about Father Raphael Noica. He was called to serve his people in Romania. It's our loss that he went back to Romania, but it's normal as well.
Yes, I'm very impressed by the fact you have known Father Raphael Noica. I didn't know that. It's for the first time when I find out such an information. It's very precious for me. Can you describe a little bit more your correspondences or your meetings with Father Raphael Noica? Could you say that Father Raphael Noica had a certain impact on you from a spiritual point of view?
Well, I would say maybe there were 10, 20 different people of different nationalities who had a spiritual impact on me. For example, I met Father Paisios, who's now Saint Paisios, on Mount Athos in 1979. He had a spiritual impact on me. Father Ephraim of Arizona, I met in his monastery at Philotheo on Mount Athos. He had a spiritual impact on me. I met when I was living in Russia in the 1976, I met a priest called Father Yev Lebedev. He had a spiritual impact on me. But, you know, I think all these people you meet, we can say it's like a bouquet of flowers. Every flower is different. Every flower is a different color, a different shape, a different perfume. And together, that's Orthodoxy. I can say that in my life, I have met a saint, at least one saint. And this one saint I met was in the southern Russian city of Krasnodar in 1976. I'd been to the cathedral for St. Peter and St. Paul Day. So this is nearly exactly 46 years ago, because it will soon be St. Peter, St. Paul Day. And I looked at the people in the church very carefully, and there was an old lady, I noticed. She took Holy Communion, the Untitled, and I left the cathedral and went back to the university where I was staying. And to my surprise, she came down and she came onto the bus with me, and she sat down opposite me, and her face shone. And at that moment, I knew what the divine light is. That woman was a saint. I don't know her name. She must have been perhaps 75 years old, 80 years old. But after Holy Communion, her face shone. I could see this very clearly. And if I come back to Father Andrew Phillips, he was a monk at the time. He was a monk and a deacon, a hierodeacon. He wasn't the priest. And I can say his mind shone, not his face, not physically, but his mind. His thoughts were inspired by the Holy Spirit. And I've seen this with others, and it was certainly the case of Father Andrew Phillips. This is someone who could explain all kinds of actually quite complex theological questions very simply. Not because he'd read lots of books, but because he had in his heart the light and understanding. You know, Christ says to us in the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." He doesn't say, "Blessed are the university professors, because they will see God." He doesn't say, "Blessed are the librarians who've read 10,000 books, who will see God." He says, "Blessed are the pure in heart. Those who are clean in heart will see God." And this I've seen time and time again in the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church, of course, is very varied. You can meet very pious people. You can meet people who are not at all pious. But the Orthodox Church is the only place where I have met saints. And this old lady in the south of Russia in 1976, she's just one example. Orthodoxy is a light that shines. And this, I speak from experience because I've seen people like this. I have met people like this. And it doesn't matter what happens. Maybe there's some scandal involving a priest or a bishop, or it doesn't matter. You know, we go to church for God. We go to church to meet Christ. And that is where we can meet Christ. And other people's lives, other people's choices, they don't concern us. You don't pay attention to scandals and mistakes. You pay attention to Christ. This is what we are here for. So this shining light, which may be seen physically, or it may be seen in people's thoughts, or it may be seen in their way of life, this is the light that shines in Orthodoxy. And it's the light that shines in darkness, which St. John, the evangelist, the theologian, speaks about in the prologue, in the first chapter of his gospel. It's the light that shines in the darkness. This is the meaning of Orthodox Christianity for me.
You have been living in many other countries, as you said earlier, not only Orthodox, but non-Orthodox countries as well, as for example, Portugal, but you have lived also in Greece, in Russia. So you, I guess, we can talk about a certain kind of pilgrimage that you have made during your life by now. Can you tell me, please, what was a country where you lived the most powerful spiritual experiences from an Orthodox point of view? Could you talk about something like that?
I honestly can't say, because I've had strong spiritual Orthodox experiences in all those countries. Because where there is Christ, where there is Untitled, Holy Communion, there you have spiritual experience. It doesn't matter where you go. As I said to you earlier, there are people, for example, Romanians who come to us, they never had a spiritual experience in Romania. And then they return to Romania and they see everything with new eyes.
Yes, I understand, and you're totally right. I like very much your way of explaining things, because most of people who gave me different testimonies were very subjective in their approaches. They told me, in Russia, I have lived the deepest spiritual experience in my life, and it is definitely in Russia where you can find God's home, or it is in Greece, or it is in Spain, or it is, I don't know, in different other countries. As for example, a very similar attitude has another Orthodox priest from another Western country. I talk about Father Ambrogio Casinasco. He's an Italian. Maybe you know him. I know him very well.
I know him very well.
Yes, we have a very strong relationship and correspondence. I have been doing with him more than 10 interviews, and even for my YouTube channel, I have done a YouTube channel interview with him. He's a very, I really admire.
He speaks Romanian.
Yes, he
speaks Romanian.
But I speak to him in Italian, because I like Italian a lot as well. And yes, he's a very strong spiritual model for me, because he's not
he is, if I may say, he is a close friend. Yes. And we are continually contacting each other, writing to each other, we correspond, and he's been to our church 3 or 4 times.
Yes, I know, because he talked a lot about you to me, Father Ambrogio Casinasco. He really admires you, and he published some articles or some of your speeches on ortodoxiatorino.com. It's a very important website, an Orthodox website in Italy, and this is why I admire your way of giving a testimony, and I appreciate a lot your capacity of remaining objective in your approach, because it's very important that. But I just wanted to put you a question regarding the personality of Metropolitan Anthony Bloom. I know he's a very important personality in Western Orthodoxy, if I can call it like that. I hadn't the opportunity to study too much about him, because in Romania there are too many books about Metropolitan Anthony Bloom's Orthodox approach. But I want to find out some more information about, of course, if you can give me a testimony about him, about his way of being, about his importance, as for example, in Western Orthodox Church. What kind of influence has he had on the development of Orthodox spirituality in different Western countries, and so on?
Well, I knew him very well in the 1970s. In fact, he tonsured me reader in 1981 in London. This is obviously before I became deacon and priest. He was a very interesting, indeed unique person. One of his greatest qualities was he had no interest in money whatsoever. He lived very, very poorly. He was someone who came to the faith, although he was Russian. His parents were not at all church people. He came to the faith as a teenager, I think when he was 14 years old. And he had a great quality of being able to explain the faith in very simple words to people who knew nothing. But this was a little bit limited, because if I may make a parallel, when you sit down and eat, you have your first course, which is maybe a soup or a salad. Then you have the main course with meat, and then you have the sweet or the dessert, maybe ice cream or something sweet. And Metropolitan Anthony was brilliant at providing the first course of the meal. He was excellent, in other words, at introducing people to the Orthodox faith. But unfortunately, he did not have the ability to keep people in the Orthodox faith. And today, I think we must be honest, most Orthodox in Western Europe have never heard of him. It's the people in their 70s and 80s, it's the old generation who know of him. And I think there are people whose reputation has gone. it's something you can read about in history books, but it's not something living. For example, if I can take two more or less contemporary Greek saints, Saint Paisios and Saint Porphyrios, these are people whose heritage is living. Saint Luke of Crimea from Russia is someone whose heritage is living. Some of the Romanian new martyrs, for example, the Valentin Gafescu, I think, these people are living examples. These are saints. And there are many people in the Russian emigration, like Metropolitan Anthony Bloom, like Father Alexander Schmemann, whom I knew also. And, you know, they were interesting people, but they were people of their time. They were people who belonged to the past, whereas the saints are living people and their influence doesn't fade. In fact, after their deaths, their influence becomes stronger and stronger. And this is the difference. There are many interesting people of various nationalities, many personalities, and they had interesting points, but you find that their books now are not read. The books are not reprinted. And they were very helpful at the time, especially among intellectual people. But you know, I have met so many people who Metropolitan Anthony Bloom received into the Orthodox Church in England, in France, in Holland, and then they gave up the faith. They didn't last very long. And you know, it's a little bit like in a boxing match. In a boxing match, you have two opponents who are fighting. Who is going to win? The person who is going to win is the last man standing. And this is what we have to do in the church. We have to go on. I'm sure you know many stories from the desert fathers in Egypt. Two young monks, they leave the desert, they go to Alexandria. One of them falls with a woman, a prostitute. Another does the same. Only one of the young monks comes back. He comes back to the spiritual father, he repents, I've fallen, I've made a mistake, forgive me. And he is still there. But the other one who didn't repent, he is lost in Alexandria. And this is what we must do. We must remain the last man standing. We must still be there at the end, whatever mistakes we make. And this is the way to holiness. I could tell you, if you have time, the story about Father Paisios on Mount Athos. Yes?
Sure.
This happened in the 1970s. There were three young Greek men who went to see Father Paisios. One of them, Dimitrios, I knew him personally. He told me the story. They went to see Father Dimitrios, who lived in a skeet near Stavronikita, and they met a monk, badly dressed. And they said, we want to meet Father Paisios. He's a saint. And this monk, who was badly dressed, he said, you want to meet a saint? Then I will take you to see a saint. And this monk, he took the three young Greek men through the forest, and there they saw a monk sitting down, smoking a cigarette and listening to the radio. And Father Paisios said, and well, this young monk, the old monk who was badly dressed, he said, here is a saint. And of course, the three young Greek men were very shocked. And they said, well, why is he a saint? And the monk said, when this monk who was smoking, listening to the radio a few years ago, he was a gangster in Athens. He sold drugs. He robbed banks. He beat up people. He ran a group of prostitutes. And then he saw God and he came here. And from all his sins, the only two sins that remain are he smokes and he listens to the radio. But look at me. When I was a young man, 20 years old, I went to church every day. I took Împărtășania, Holy Communion, at least once a month. Here I am, 40 years later. What do? I go to church every day. I read my prayers. I keep the fasts. I have made no progress. That is why this monk you see smoking and listening to the radio, he is a saint. He's made progress. And of course, the three young men, afterwards they discovered that the monk they'd been talking to was Father Paisios. He'd never told them he was Father Paisios. And this story tells us that progress is about repentance. Progress is about changing ourselves, about moving forwards, about moving ahead. And we should not stay with our old sins. And this is so often the case. I can look at myself. When I was 20 years old, I went to church as often as possible. I kept the fasts. What have I done? And I would like to tell you something else. You spoke earlier about spiritual experiences in different countries. And I would like to tell you that perhaps, well, certainly some of the greatest spiritual experiences I have are in confession. When I hear the ispovedania, when I hear the confession of people who come, and they tell me, you know, there are people who come to confession and they are so pure in heart. Their hearts are so clean. They're such wonderful people, men, women, and they think nothing of themselves. I'm just a poor sinner. That's all I am. I'm a nobody. I'm nothing. But I learn from these people, you know, that there are people who have remarkable lives. There are people, for example, they've suffered so much in their life and they have kept a pure faith in God. They've never lost hope. They have never lost their faith. And these people are exemplary. And you know, these people are all around us. You see them in the street every day. You see them in the shops every day, and you don't know. And that's very important because it teaches us not to judge other people. Because, well, there is a Russian proverb, for example, it says that another person's soul is like a dark forest. In other words, you don't know what is in the other person's soul, what is in the other person's heart. So we should be very, very careful. And of course, this takes us back to the gospel, where Christ's words. What does Christ tell us? He tells us about the Pharisee and the tax collector. And the Pharisee says, "Oh, I'm a good man. I do everything like this." And the tax collector, he is saying, "I'm a sinner. God forgive me, a sinner." And this is the correct attitude that we should have.
I am telling you very honestly, you have just gave me a life lesson, a very spiritual. Your message was so deep, and now I'm thinking about the fact that maybe I am too ignorant. Maybe I haven't took into account some other people that I have met by now, because every individual we are meeting during our life is like a lesson for us. It's like an open book, and we have to read it very carefully in order to learn something for our consciousness, for our soul. Because yes, I repeat, and I totally agree with you. We have to be very concentrating on our inner identity. Whether we are Romanians or Greeks or Russians or Bulgarians or English or Spaniards or some other national identities, what kind of inner identity do I have? And yes, I am trying to be very careful when I'm meeting someone, because maybe he could be a taxi driver or a truck driver, or I don't know, some other else. Maybe and I'm considering myself as an intellectual, being a philosophy teacher, but I know that a worker, as for example, or I don't know, a taxi driver, as I said earlier, maybe he could much deeper than I, and I should think about that. And every meeting of us with different other persons could be a real life experience for us.
It's strange. that you mentioned taxi drivers, because we have 6 taxi drivers in our church, our parochia, our parish. They are all Romanian.
Yes.
And you know, I admire these people. One of them, he has 3 jobs. He works during the day. Then why? Because he has a wife, he has 3 children, and he's looking after them all. You know, and for me, he's an example. I'm only a priest. He's a taxi driver. This man has sacrificed himself. He sacrifices himself every day for his family. In our church, we have so many people who work in building. We have so many people who have very, very simple jobs. Many of them don't speak very good English, but you know, we understand each other. We also have many truck drivers in our church. Again, nearly all of them are Romanian. There are some who are not. We have some Russian ones as well and Ukrainian, but most of them are Romanians. And what a difficult job this is. You know, to be a priest is an easy job compared to these people.
Yes, I am really grateful for the lesson you have preached today to me. It was an amazing, I don't know how should I characterize it, but it was a real strong spiritual experience for me today hearing you. I would have one last question, because I know you are very busy, and I'm very grateful to you that you gave me this time, your time this evening, answering all my questions. And I know maybe and probably some of them are a little bit difficult, but you are very patient to me and you answered in detail my every single question. Now I would have a very brief question to you, because I know you are working among non-Orthodox people living in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I repeat, I really admire your country because of its culture, because the literary works of different important writers such as Thomas Hardy or William Shakespeare or Jane Austen with her Pride and Prejudice and so on, because of English philosophers, and not only English philosophers, all philosophers coming from the United Kingdom. So I'm feeling as I was very connected to your country. But I know you are working and you are preaching among non-Orthodox Christians. Maybe it's a little bit difficult for you, or maybe you feel it like a blessing. But given the fact that you are living in a non-Orthodox country, and a young man, a young fellow, would come to you and he would like to become an Orthodox believer, but he doesn't know where should he start. What kind of advice would you give him? Would you give it to him? And what kind of Orthodox book would you recommend to him in order that he understands better the importance of Orthodox spirituality and also the blessing of being Orthodox Christian?
Well, the first thing I tell him, come to services, meet other Orthodox people, stay after the service and talk to people. You can have some coffee, you can have, in other words, meet Orthodox people as they are. If you want to read an Orthodox book, then obviously you must read the New Testament. The New Testament is the most important Orthodox book. And the second most important Orthodox book is the Book of Prayers, the prayer book. You begin praying in the morning and the evening. Maybe you only read 1 or 2 prayers at the beginning, but you make a start. And then, you know, books are not so important. If people want to read more books, I tell them, read the lives of the saints. We have, for example, in English, we have the prologue of the great Serbian saint, Saint Nikolai of Ohrid, Velimirovic. And he wrote 4 volumes, a prologue with the lives of the saints for every day. And that is a very valuable book. But books on, I'm sorry, I don't want to offend you, but books on philosophy, that's something else. That's for certain characters, for certain people. It's not the most important thing. The Orthodox philosophy of life is in the 4 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then we can talk about there. For example, when I have time after the Sunday liturgy, I will give people talks about the Gospels and what they mean, so that people go deeper. And people are very interested because they say, I've never understood this. We'll say, I will find out what the Holy Father said and I will tell you next week. But people have many misunderstandings about the Gospels. So they like to talk, they like to know more. People want knowledge of Christ, the Mother of God, the saints. But you know, I think, as you already said, our greatest school is the school of life. Every meeting we have is given to us by God. Every person we meet is something given to us by God for our spiritual edification, that we grow spiritually. So we must never waste time.
Thank you. This is all that I can say right now. I'm very, very delighted for this opportunity. I really appreciate your spiritual road. I really appreciate the power of your testimony and your inner power of remaining objective in your approaches. And of course, I really appreciate your spiritual maturity, which I repeat should be a model for those who want to live something more about the truth, something more about God, something more about being Orthodox Christian. What can I say? What else can I say? I wish you a lot of light in your pastoral activity, because you are working with souls, and this is probably the most important mission that an individual could have on the face of the earth. I will be very happy if you would pray for me when you have time, and also I would be very happy if you could give me a blessing. Thank you very much again.
Well, I would just like to mention one thing. Our bishop is Romanian, Metropolitan Joseph of the Metropolia of Western and Southern Europe. And we are all very grateful to him for protecting us, for looking after us, and being such a wonderful Metropolitan. And if you wish to meet a wonderful bishop, meet Metropolitan Joseph Bopp, who lives in Paris, but he has a huge Metropolia. He has 5 bishops with him, some 700 parishes all over Western Europe. You know, I ask him to pray for me, so I will have to ask him to pray for you as well. Of course, you have my prayers, and may God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May God bless you as well. And I hope to have the opportunity of making other interviews with you in the future as well.
Thank you very much.
God
bless you. Good night.
God bless you. Good night.